Welcome back everybody to the continued coverage of one of the most exciting tournaments in the world of chess, the FIDE World Cup. This is a 256 player knockout event which happens every 2 years, and the finalists of this tournament will get tickets to the Canada's tournament. The Canada's tournament is going to happen next year, and the World Championship match also next year, 2022. This is, of course, not the World Championship match that is going to happen later this year in November between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Needless to say, this tournament is extremely important. This is the round number 1, and in this video we will be looking at a match between Iordachescu Viorel, a Grandmaster from Moldavia, very experienced Grandmaster, and Volodar Murzin, one of Russia's biggest super talents. He is a 14-year-old international master, but I would say definitely Grandmaster level, and in this match specifically, he showed his mettle. This game that we will be seeing is the last game of the match. In the first 5 games of the match, they made 5 draws. It was a very contested match, very, very close in terms of level these two players were. In the 6th match, Viorel Iordachescu has the white pieces, and with a victory, of course, finishes the match. With a draw, the match goes into Armageddon, which is a very, very sharp way of finishing a match. Volodar Murzin with the black pieces, Viorel Iordachescu with the white pieces. Let's get going. E4, C6, we have the Caro-Kann defense, D4, D5, E5, the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann defense. This is a very typical way of playing for an advantage. With white, you do not want to exchange pawns. You're just keeping as many pieces on the board as possible and try to take advantage of the fact that, of course, these 2 pawns offer you space advantage in the center and on the king side. Bishop to F5, knight to F3, E6, bishop to E2. This is one of the most topical lines, the main line of this variation. Knight to E7, C3, H6, castle, knight to D7. You will see in this game, in this video, that black's play is very cagey. Firstly, it's just going to withdraw his pieces, find the right squares, and only after that try to open up the position on the queen side and create havoc in white's position. Let's see how the game continued. A4, A5, knight to A3. White is trying to take space advantage on both sides. Bishop to H7, knight to E1. This is a very typical way for white to try to create an avalanche of pawns with the move F4, but also at the same time exchange one of black's best pieces, and that is the bishop on H7. Why I'm saying it's a very good piece for black? Because not only that this bishop is controlling, very well controlling this diagonal H7, B1, but also in the case of, let's say, a short castle later on in the game, this bishop is going to be a tremendous defender. This is why white is going to try to play after the move knight to E1, bishop to D3, and then in case of an exchange, this knight is going to land on D3, after which it can look on this side, try to control the expansion that is coming. There is definitely an expansion coming on the queen side. That is black's only plan in the position. Or potentially also knight to F4, knight to H5, land on this beautiful square on H5 and try to join the attack. Knight E1, a very versatile move. Knight to G6, bishop to D3. We see that black is kind of hiding this bishop behind this knight. Bishop to E7, knight to C2, castle, G3, C5. As I was mentioning, this expansion was going to come one way or the other. H4, trying to play the move H5, open up the position, and once again, exchange these bishops on H7. This is white's main plan. It looks as if black was just playing a very weird way, a very weird form of chess, putting the bishop on H7, then getting the knight to G6 in front of this bishop. Very, very strange, very cagey play. But this is the Caro-Kann. This is the advanced variation in the Caro-Kann. It looks very weird, but if black manages to activate, slowly activate his pieces, he's going to be very dangerous. C4, bishop to e2, knight to b8, another very cagey move. In this position, black had, instead of the move knight to b8, which was played in the game, this was probably his golden opportunity to try to open up the position on the king side, with a move such as f6. For example, if you go f6, right now you can take on f6, but generally this is considered to be quite good for black. This knight is finally going to land on a beautiful square. Despite the fact that this knight on g6 doesn't have any good squares for the moment, I'm actually going to go knight to h8, knight to f7, knight to d6, and then I'm going to land the knight on e4, supported by the bishop on e4. Black has actually a very beautiful and very elastic position. After f6, white also has the option of trying to consolidate his pawn in the center on e5. This sort of, I don't even know what to call it, just some sort of a crazy pawn chain. But after f takes e5, f takes e5, the problem is that queen b6 is coming on the board, and this just paralyzes white's position. Knight takes e5 is a threat because this pawn on d4 is pinned. Also, the bishop on c1 is kind of paralyzed. You cannot move it because you're going to have to face queen takes b2. Black is the one to be preferred in this position. After rook takes f8, black is just much better. Of course, this was all happening after the move f6, which did not happen in the game. He decided to remaneuver his knight to c6. He thought that this is a better square for the knight, which is debatable. Knight to g2, knight to c6, h5. Now we see a typical expansion on that side. Knight to h8. As I was mentioning, it looks very awkward the way black played. Nevertheless, slowly is going to push white's pieces back. And also this knight, despite the fact that, okay, it looks weird on h8, after f6, knight to f7 is going to become very active. Knight to e3, queen to d7, f4. At this point, white had a tremendous opportunity to paralyze black's position with the very good move bishop to g4. This bishop to g4, not only that, okay, it creates this pin on the pawn on e6, but also prepares the move after, for example, f6, which is the typical way to try to release some tension in the position and get this knight back into play. The problem with this move is that after knight to f4, black can pretty much resign. After f5, I'm just simply going to drop back on f3, and something is going to be sacrificed on d5. Whether that's going to be my knight, my bishop, the other knight, something, pretty much anything at this point can be sacrificed on d5. There's absolutely no way black can stop that. You can play the move knight to f7, but after knight takes d5, you cannot take back, because after e6, I'm going to recapture the knight on f7. Not only that, but I'm also going to take this pawn on d5. I'm going to recapture my piece with interest. Also, the bishop on h7 with the pawn on f5 is completely dead. So, of course, bishop to g4, this would have been a great move for white. He did not spot it. He played the move f4, which feels very, very typical as well. You want to push your pawns. You want to gain as much space as possible. Problem is, black is in time to get his pieces out. f6, take on f6, bishop takes f6, bishop to g4, and now we will understand how black's position kind of comes to life out of nowhere. Knight to f7, suddenly all of my pieces are playing a very active role. b3, c takes b3, queen takes b3, knight to e7, bishop to a3, bishop to e4, queen to b5. Basically, what white did wrong in this game, up to this point, he combined too many plans together. He meshed too many plans together, and none of them was actually the correct one. He played the move bishop to g4 on this side, then he opened up the position on this side, then he get his bishop on a3 on this side. Nevertheless, black's plan was much more compact. Black was just trying to get all his pieces on their ideal squares and open up this c file for the attack against the pawn on c3, and this is exactly what he did. Queen to b6, queen to c8, understanding the fact that you don't want to exchange the queens. This queen with a king on g1 and this pawn's so overextended on this side, the king on g1 is going to become weak. Let's see what happened to that king. Rook to c1, and now one of the moves, in my opinion, of the match. Rook to a6. Black was in need of a plan, and immediately the young international master, who will surely become a grandmaster, maybe even after this tournament, who knows, but he spotted the plan, and that is to activate this knight on f7. This is the last piece, well, excepting the rook on f8, which could potentially become active, but it's not in line right now to be the next piece to get activated. That is the knight on f7. You have to find a way to do that. You can do that by playing the move rook to a6. At the same time, the rook on a8 was not tremendously active. The way to activate it is to put it on a semi-open file, attacking a weakness with rook to c6. So this move is a multi-purpose move. Very, very good move. I would say probably the move of the game. After this, black is just simply taking over. Rook to e1, knight to d6, queen to e2, knight to f5, activating absolutely every single piece. It just feels like black is just breathing much fresher air right now. Look at this bishop on e4, a monster. Look at this knight on f5, a beautiful piece. You cannot exchange that because I'm going to solidify this pawn, this bishop on e4. Your position strategically as white is busted. Rook to c6, queen to d2, rook to e8, bishop takes d6, knight takes d6, bishop to h3, trying to get this knight to g4, landing it on e5. The problem is you are the one with too many weaknesses. b5, creating a passed pawn after the exchange of the a4 and the b pawn. Knight to g4, take on a4, knight to e3, queen to d8, knight to e5, rook to b6. I don't even have to take this. This bishop on f6 is a tremendous defender. Your knight on e5, it's a beautiful piece, not doing much, unfortunately. Rook to b6, rook to a1. I'm also a pawn up. Queen to b8, rook to e2, rook to b1, and now finally black is breaking through. Queen to a2, rook takes a1, queen takes a1, queen to b3, rook to a2, bishop takes e5. Finally the right moment to take that knight from e5, f takes e5, and knight to b5, focusing my attention on the weakness on c3. You have a lot of weaknesses as white, and I'm also an extra pawn up. Rook takes a4, d4, another very important move. Of course, you're not going to take on c3 because after rook to a3, you're going to lose this knight. You do still have some saving grace. For example, you can go queen to b1, and I cannot take here because I'm getting checkmated. So after queen to b1, I would have to enter this endgame. Of course, this is not something that black wants. Black is trying to avoid the exchange of the queens because the king on h2, coupled with the fact that this bishop is lingering around on e4 in the center, beautifully placed, the king on h2 is pretty weak. So let's take advantage of that. Of course, not by taking on c3 and allowing tactics, but by opening the position, opening more files with the move d4. Tremendous understanding by the young Russian. Bishop takes f1. Why not take on d4? Because after queen takes e3, well, first of all, you just lose a piece, and that's enough. Bishop to f1 was played, rook to c8. Now that the bishop is gone from the attack of this pawn on e6, it's time to bring my final attacker into the game. Rook to c4, rook takes c4, bishop takes c4, queen takes c3. Now I'm a couple of pawns up. Bishop takes e6, king to f8, actually just one pawn up after bishop takes e6, no more pawns up, but I do have the more dangerous pawns. This guy is ready to go down the board. This guy is ready to go down the board. Unfortunately, your pawns are pretty immobile. Queen to a4, queen to b2, king to h3, queen to b4, trying to exchange the queens and create that passed pawn, get the passed pawn rolling. Queen to d1, knight to c4. Now we see this transition. It was white previously who was trying to exchange the queens. Now it's black who is trying to exchange the queens because you don't have any pieces to stop my passed pawns from getting to the promotion square. Queen to d2, queen to b1. Finally, Black is getting in. And at this point, it was the players both had around 15 seconds on the clock. You could see it on the live feed, on the FIDE live feed. And unfortunately for Viorel Iordachescu, after 5 games, this one was the 6th one, the final game of the tiebreak before the Armageddon. And unfortunately for him, his nerves gave up. He collapsed. The position is already extremely difficult. Simply put, you're slowly getting checkmated pretty much. The only way to defend against the checkmate at this point was to go king to h4. And after queen to h1, to protect with the bishop on h3. This was the only way. The position would have remained quite complicated if Black would have went for queen to h1. But needless to say, he did not see that. He played the move queen to d4. And if you want to, well, let's say practice your checkmate in a few moves, you can stop the video right now, take 10 to 15 seconds, try to spot the checkmate, and come back to the video. Checkmate is after queen to h1, king to g4, bishop to f3, king to f5, queen to h5, and that is simply a checkmate. After this move was played, queen to h5, Volodar Murzin was looking at his opponent, who did not realize it's a checkmate, was incredulous about the checkmate in the middle of the board like this. It took him 5 to 10 seconds to realize that it was a checkmate. They shook hands, and the youngster is through to the second round. Beautiful game by the youngster Volodar Murzin. This is a prodigy that we will definitely have our eyes on.